Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with a remarkable guest. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Amos Fox. Dr. Fox is a professor of practice at Arizona State University's Future Security Initiative. At ASU, Dr. Fox teaches in the Masters of Arts and Global Security program within the School of Politics and Global Studies. He's also the managing editor of Small Wars Journal, and he hosts the Revolution in Military Affairs podcast. Amos is also a lecturer at the University of Houston, where he teaches strategy and international relations theory within the Department of Politics and International Relations. Well, welcome to Tipping Spears.
Hannah, thanks so much for the opportunity to come on the podcast, and I apologize for my job title being a mouthful. It's I trip over it too, and I've been doing it for over a year now. So yeah, it's the line wire diagram that shows the relationships between everything is just as confusing as it is to try and say. So
well, that's good to know. Yeah, you've accomplished a lot in your career journey. So I'm excited to talk to you today and kind of figure out how all that happened, connect the dots.
All right.
So can you tell us kind of where your story begins?
It's always an interesting question because then it's like, well, what do you mean by my story? But I guess I'll start at the beginning and quickly move forward in time. So I was born in Oklahoma, and I don't consider myself an Oklahoman or a Sooner at this point because when I was a kid, so I grew up in Norman. I lived in Norman until I was 11. And then my parents divorced. My mom was from Indiana, so we relocated up to Indiana. And so I went from living in Norman, a nice college town, to rural Indiana in the middle of nowhere, where my closest neighbor was probably a mile away. And it was rolling hills and farmland. And, I'd come from a decent sized town back then. I think it's an even more decent sized city today. But so it was like this stark contrast in realities that I went from as an 11-year-old boy. And so anyhow, I consider myself a Hoosier and I consider myself a Midwesterner because I lived in Indiana the rest of that time, from the time I was 11 until I left for the Army in 2004. So this would have been like 1991 to 2004, right? So even more formative period of your life. You go through middle school and high school and college, all there in Indiana. And so I grew up there. I wanted to play. So I played football in high school and I played a year in college. My goal actually was to be a high school, but then it changed to college football coach while I was going through college, and so I ended up getting my dream job, if you will. I got a college football coaching job when I was 22, and so I coached at Butler University for 2 years after having coached high school football for a year. But then the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan started around that same time. And going back to foundational things, I saw the movie Patton when I was a kid. And it always struck me, the beginning scene with Patton out at in front of the American flag giving the speech. And one of the lines that always stuck with me as a little kid all the way up to today was, Patton was saying, when you look back, and George C. Scott was saying, as Patton, when you look back and you're sitting at your fireplace with your grandkid and they ask you, what did you do in the great WW2? What do you want to tell them? You don't want to tell them, and pardon my language, but you shoveled shit in Louisiana. And I felt that way when the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan and Iraq started picking up. I didn't want to look back and say I chose not to do anything. I chose to just, not interrupt my life for the service to the country. And so as a result of that, I ended up getting commissioned through ROTC. I went to Indiana University at Indianapolis. So I ended up getting commissioned through that and selected to go active duty. And so that's why I ended up going into the Army as an Army officer. That line from Patton like haunted me the whole time. And I was like, well, there's a war going on now, and I'm of the perfect age to go do this, And so I was like, I'll go back to coaching football, because I was initially just going to do 3 years. I had a 3-year contract coming out of college, and coming out of ROTC, I had the 3-year contract, and I was like, I'll go do that. and then I'll get out, I've done my deployment, and then I'll go back into coaching ball, and then think life happens, you know what I mean? Things change, your family, you go from being a single to being married and being a father within that 3-year period, and so your priorities shift as a result of that. And it's one thing to be young and single and not making any money, trying to get your foot back in the door coaching. And it's quite another to be married with a kid and trying to get your foot back in the door, making no money, So that was just one of those things that was not tenable for me. As I think about how I bear my responsibilities as a father and husband, that I wasn't going to put my family in that situation. And so I delayed getting back into coaching, and I was like, I'll stay in the Army a little longer until I'm in a better spot where you can pivot out. And that ended up in being a 20+ year career instead of just a 3-year contract. So that's basically it. And then, I did my time in the Army, retired. I started a PhD while I was in the Army, finished that, and was able to transition basically as soon as I retired out of the Army into teaching. So I got hired at Arizona State pretty much right after that. And that's got me where I am right now. So that's it in a nutshell. That may have been a long introduction, but there it is.
No, it's really interesting to kind of hear your journey. As you're talking, I was thinking, kind of the original career plans to coach football, and you served our country for decades, and now you're kind of coaching the next generation of folks that will kind of fill your shoes in defense. So it's interesting to kind of hear how it came kind of full circle, even if that wasn't necessarily the initial long-term plan.
Definitely not the initial plan.
So was there a particular, event or person that kind of served as a catalyst, for your career as you're kind of navigating, the military or, as you transition out?
So I'm like it's funny when I reflect on some of this, because I'll talk to folks and they'll be like, man, I worked for this great person, or I worked for that great person. I don't have many people that I worked for that I thought was great. And I'm always like, was I in just the units that had all the like mediocre to bad leaders? Did they all like end up where I was at? Because I often feel that way, especially when I talk to other people,
Yeah.
But there were a few people along the way that were really just different because they didn't reflect that reality that I experienced. And so one of them was, and he's still in the Army. I think he's going to retire soon. But Brian McCarthy, he's a colonel. We worked together for early in my career, and we were both in 4th Infantry Division at Fort Hood, and we both deployed to Iraq in the 2005-2006 deployment that 2nd Brigade 4ID did at the time. But we were in totally different units, and he was a grade ahead. He was a rank ahead of me. And so I didn't know him at the time, but when we got back, our brigade moved. So 4th Infantry Division moved from Fort Hood up to Fort Carson in Colorado. And so we were both parts of the unit that moved, but he had come from the unit that he was in into the unit that I was in, and he took over as the battalion operations officer. And I had moved out of the company that I was in and moved into the battalion headquarters, and I worked for him as the assistant operations officer. So I was his assistant, and we had to stand the unit back up at Fort Carson because essentially when the unit moved up there, it completely destroyed, and then only a small nucleus of us moved up there, and then we had to reconstitute the whole thing. And he was just super chill in a world of non-chill people. And I appreciate both ends. I can handle both ends, but like working directly for him was a great offset to our battalion commander, who was on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. And so I respected him so much that I did everything I could when we would go into meetings with the battalion commander to make sure that I had any and every bit of information that he might need in the event that the battalion commander, tried to poke holes in anything he was saying. And I would sit behind him or next to him and be there with info to be able to whisper into his ear to help him, right? Because I cared that much about him, because he cared that much about me,
Yeah.
And one of the things that typified that, I think there's a lot of like talk that goes into that, But we had this, you know, battalion commander had a policy. When we went to the field, nobody was allowed to leave the field outside of essentially like a family emergency. And my daughter, my oldest daughter, had just been born, and she actually just left for college last week. And
Wow.
she was brand new. I'd just gotten back from paternity leave, and we went right out to the field the week I got back, right? Because back then you only got like a week off.
Mhm.
And we went right back out to the field and I had this newborn baby, and like being a dad's a super big deal to me. And so like that's been part of the rub for me my entire professional career, especially in the Army, is that tug between being a father and husband and being doing your job in the Army. And we were out in the field and we'd been out for, I forget how long we were out in the field, like 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. But after a certain point, after like a week, he comes up to me and he's like, he always called me Foxy, by the way, and he still calls me Foxy. And he came up to me, he's like, "Hey, Foxy," and I'm like, "Yeah, what's up, sir?" He's like, "Hey, take my truck and my driver, and I want you to go back to battalion headquarters." And he like winks at me, and he said, "I need you to figure out something you've got to take care of for me, but go home and see your baby and come back out tomorrow." You know, and so this was early in the morning of that day. So I got basically a whole day. He sent me back, let me hang out at the house with my daughter and my wife for a day, and then come back out. And little things like that, you know, you can talk a big game, but little things like that to me, for me as an individual, those are a huge deal. And so that was one of the lessons I took away from being a leader, is that, you know, there are rules. Some rules can be bent, you know what I mean? You should still always look out for your people and understand the uniqueness of their specific situation at a specific period of time. And so like that was a huge deal for me. And just little things like that, he would always do. He would Another funny story about him too. He left work one day early, and he's like, "Hey, Foxy," and I'm like, "What's up?" He's like, "Don't work too late today." I'm like, "Okay, where are you going?" He's like, "The Fort Carson's in Colorado Springs." He's like, "I'm going to a concert up in Denver." And I was like, "Okay, cool." You know, and he had already changed out of his uniform. And then like that night, this is early in the days of texting too, you know, especially
Okay.
texting in the Army.
Yeah.
He's texting me from the concert, and I'm like, I don't even know how to interact with his text. I'm sitting there with my wife. I'm like, I don't know what to respond to this. You know what I mean? And so it was just little things like that that, you know, always stuck with me. And when I was in Iraq the last time, he was commanding a battalion that was there, and I worked at the Land Component Command headquarters in Baghdad. And periodically, I get a random phone call from a number on my desk phone, and then I'd pick it up and I'd say my normal thing I'm supposed to
Mhm.
say when I answer, and he'd be like, "Foxy, what's up? It's Mac," you know. And he just called me from random places in Iraq to just chat, you know. And so stuff like that. So he's like one of the few people that I've come across that really stuck with me and let me know he like was formative, because to that point I was in like an abusive environment as it related to how people were dealt with, right? You were
Yeah.
just there. Like my first company commander, he ended up getting divorced.
Yeah.
But he would keep us at work till 8 or 9 o'clock at night every night right up until we deployed to Iraq in 2005. And he was sleeping in his car because he was
Mhm.
about to get divorced, you know, and he didn't care.
He didn't
And I'm
care.
like, yeah, and I'm like, "Dude, what are we doing?" And the same
Yeah.
thing, my second deployment, we would work about the same till 8 o'clock at night. And it would just be nonsense, right? You were just
Yeah.
there doing nothing. And I'm like, "Why are we here?" Well, I can't go because the S3 didn't let us sleep. Different S3. I had to
Yeah.
move over to a different battalion right before that deployment. But it was little things like that. And he showed me that you don't have to be that way. And
Mm.
actually, if you structure yourself, and that was part of his thing that I found really helpful, was he was highly structured but loose enough to react to changes.
Yeah.
And so that was one of my takeaways and I just carry this thing with me, but like I highly structure out like my week, because people
Yeah.
often say, "How do you get so much done?" I'm like,
Hmm.
"Well, a lot of it is I don't just wake up and say, 'What am I doing today?'" You know what I mean? I have like a calendar that I keep. This is a 6 month calendar, and then within every week, every Sunday, I update what my schedule is for that week. And so and I actually, it goes the other way too. It kind of cuts both ways, because then I get like hyper irritated when somebody does come in and try and throw in something at the last second, like
I
if you're
get
not
that. I
if you're
get
not
that.
scheduling with me at least a week or two out, I may tell you no,
Yeah.
and if I tell you yes, I'm actually going to be pretty irritated when I tell you yes. So anyway, that was one of the things though that I learned there with him. And so he was terrific. And he really did show me like you can still truly be a people person
Mhm,
and care about people.
mhm.
And so that was something I've always taken when I was a leader in the Army.
Yeah.
Whether it was leading and commanding a company or a troop, or if it was leading, a staff section, or as a member of a bigger staff section, was always like you can take care of your people in ways that still meet the commander's intent, right? But
Yeah.
still allow them to be human beings. Because that was one of the big things I always felt. I'm like, what's that scene? What's that movie with Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg, the cop movie?
Oh,
The
I
other
know it.
guys, the other
Yeah.
guys, right? And so Mark Wahlberg's always saying, "I'm a peacock. You got to let me fly," right? That's how I feel too. I don't like being boxed in, right? And so that's part of the rub also with having been in the Army, is that you're fairly boxed in, and that
Yeah.
doesn't like mesh with my personality. And so I've always tried to make things structured such that like we come in, we know what we're doing, we work hard during that period of
Mhm,
time, but then at the end of the day, there is an end of the day, and I
mhm,
say, go home, and you go home. You know what I
mhm.
mean? Because I always wanted my people to be people, right? I
Yeah.
wanted them to be, fathers and mothers. Forget what the other one was
Yeah.
called. Fathers and mothers and husbands and wives, right?
Yeah.
Because like it drove me crazy that I was just sitting around at work, not being able to be like just myself, and b, there for the people that depended on me on like an emotional level. So I guess that's really, he's the big one. I think he's going to retire here soon, but he's, out of all the people I've interacted with, he's by far like the one who's stuck with me, and I think still means the most to me.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a great approach. The way you described it, you're setting people up for long-term success, not burnout, not re-upping, long-term
Yeah.
success. And it's just a great example of how, you take care of people and they'll take care of you. And
Yeah.
that's not something you can necessarily command or order, right? You have to live
Yeah.
it like how you so beautifully described. So
Yeah. And I think sorry, I think that that's really like important, because again, the Army, out of I think all the services, is it's a people-centric
people,
service, right?
yep.
And so if you don't look after the people beyond lip service, right? And beyond like the pop culture phrases we like to throw around, like, oh, leaders eat last,
Yeah,
but you really do things to show them that you care about them, their specific situation in the moment,
yeah,
right? Um, and again, it's hard, but I think like that you owe it to your people. If you take care of your people, they're going to take care of you, and they're going to work hard for you. The other part of that too, and there's a bit of a rub, because it would come like at work, like I would push everybody really hard
mhm,
throughout the day, right? But I was pushing them hard so that they would get everything done that needed to be done that day, so that they could then go home at a decent time
yeah,
and be home for dinner and be home for, whatever, ball games and all the other stuff. And so like during the day, it wasn't just like we're all sitting around chilling. It was me running
mhm,
around, uh, pushing people pretty hard to get things done. So I think sometimes that cuts the opposite way, and people don't appreciate that. So there's also, you just have to, that's one of the things I think when you approach it in that fashion, you have to be aware of too.
mhm. So what are some of the biggest, obstacles that you faced in your career? Or can you tell us kind of how you overcame them?
Yeah, the first, and it basically shut everything else down. But in terms of obstacles, and it pales in comparison. So when I was at Fort Leavenworth during the Command and General Staff College,
Mhm.
my son died unexpectedly, and we woke up one morning and he was dead in his crib, and that overcoming that is it's still, and I mean, hell, it's been 10 years now.
Yeah.
It still hits me hard on every level,
Mhm.
and so overcoming, not overcoming, but accepting that reality and then being able to still function and not letting it consume you was
Mhm.
challenging. And then also the other part of all that too, and this is where I think people, especially since we're talking about this, and people that are listening really need to understand this. Like guys have feelings too,
Yeah.
and so a lot of people would get they didn't want to talk to me about how I felt, right? Because, you know, I'm a guy, right?
Yeah.
My wife had people that would be like, hey, my kids had people, but nobody wanted to talk to me. And I think just A, because I'm a guy, but then also B, the other part, bigger picture is I think people don't want to talk about it because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's 100% uncomfortable. It should be uncomfortable. It's not a common thing. And because of that, people would shy away from talking about it, bringing it up. This is
Mhm.
one of the things we used to always wrestle with. We still wrestle with. Um, and my daughter, in fact, at school, she had to do an introductory family tree type thing for her
Mhm.
French class. And she was like, I don't know, people are going to act weird. But, out of honoring my son, we still always say, like I have
Yeah.
4 kids and he's passed. But when people say, how many kids do you have? I'm like, well, do I say 3 or 4? Depends on the situation and what I want,
Yeah.
how open I'm being in this conversation with this person. So that was obviously significant and massive. And I was always focused on my wife and my kids, but that made me even more focused. And I think perhaps maybe it hurt me professionally
Yeah.
to a degree because I was like, check it out, like we're working really hard till this time,
Yeah.
and then I'm leaving, you're leaving. Don't bother me when I'm at home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it was something that people either just don't, I mean, a lot of people don't have the experience to understand, right? They can say, and you
Mhm.
can say you can empathize with somebody and say you understand, but you don't understand, right? You
Right.
don't understand the pull that it has on everything else in your personal life. And because of that, like it'd be like, well, he leaves at whatever 6 o'clock and then he doesn't respond to
Yeah.
anybody. And it's like, dude, I am focused on the number one thing in my life, which is my family. And everything else at this point, like work is a means
Mhm.
to, providing for my family, but it's not above my family. And so that was one of the things, especially as I continued on, because it got even more important, like family decisions as I continued on from that point forward outweighed all the other decisions. And and that's just something going back to understanding people and the way the military works. It's very much how much can I squeeze from you, right? Because I'll squeeze until there's nothing left to squeeze out of you, and then I'll still squeeze some more, right? And
Yeah.
I said I'm not going to be squeezed beyond this point, and I'll
Yeah.
I'll let you squeeze me real hard while I'm here, but beyond that, you don't get anything. And so that proved more problematic as I continued along in my career because as you go more senior in rank, they expect more from you. And it was like, there's still a hard stop that I'm building in. And if it hurts me, it hurts me because I'm not sacrificing my relationship with my family, nor the time that I spend with my kids or any of that
Mhm.
other stuff. And so that was the biggest hurdle. There were other things along the way that were,
Mhm.
that don't even, at this point, like after that, didn't even, aren't even like, there was minor little hiccups that happened in the time. So that's it. I don't want to like, I'll go ahead and throw one out just so we don't go on like a down depressed uh, phase here. So one of the things when I started off in the Army, I started as an artillery officer, but I branch transferred right after we got to Fort Carson.
Mhm.
And so I went from being an artillery officer to an armor officer. And I'd always, in my head, there's like a mentality with different branches. And I'm very much like I said, I'm a peacock. You got to let me fly. Don't box me in. Don't tell me what to do, And I move fast and hard.
Mhm.
And so armor was far more in line with with me and my personality.
Mhm.
And so artillery is very much the opposite. It's
Mhm.
very, very, very technical, very much like it's highly, I don't even know, like highly controlled, right? And it has to
Yeah.
be because of what it is and what it does. But it just didn't mesh with my the way that my mind works and the way that I work as a human being. And so I branch transferred. And it's funny because the battalion commander that I mentioned earlier, he was like, when I brought my branch transfer stuff up, he's like, you need to think about transferring infantry because he was an infantry officer.
Yeah.
I'm like, I've already thought about all this. I don't want to transfer infantry. I'm not an infantry guy,
Mhm.
you know? I was like, I'm a move fast and break stuff person and like ready, set, go, get out of my way. And I was like, and he's like, well, you need to sit on this tonight and think about it and then come back to me tomorrow. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went home and I'm like, telling my wife, I'm like, hey, Colonel so-and-so wants me to blah, blah, blah. And she's like, what? That's stupid. And I'm like, yeah, I know it's stupid, but I got to pretend like I'm doing it. And the next day it was like, knock on the door, mother may I. So will you sign my memo, please, you know? And and then he signed it. But say all that to say. So then it was my branch transfer got approved because this is also the time when the Army was hemorrhaging junior officers.
Yeah.
And so they're like, whatever you want, we'll do. Just don't leave, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I put that you had to type up a memo outlining why you wanted to transfer branches.
Mhm.
And like the closing thing is, and if you don't approve this, I'm going to get out of the Army, you know?
Mhm.
So it got approved, but then I had to learn, a branch that I never
Yeah.
really had experienced before. And so it was a steep learning curve on my end. And then I also always want to do well and
Mhm.
know what it is I'm doing and saying and why I'm doing and saying what I'm
Mhm.
doing. So then it was a huge self-study that I pushed myself into so that I could learn how to be an armor officer, both doctrinally, but then also theoretically, right? Like what's the the philosophical approach that isn't in doctrine that goes into being an armor officer. And again, it goes back to that, when I watched Patton as a little kid, I remember
Yeah.
thinking and watching that, I was like, dude, that's how I, view the world. And it's
Yeah.
like that always has kind of been how my mind worked, where it's like, get out of my way, and
Yeah.
Patton it's actually at the backdrop on my computer screen, which you can't see, is a picture of Patton sitting in the desert with his quote, lead me, follow me, or get the hell out of my
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And my kids, it's funny, my kids say that all the time too.
Oh, that's
But
funny.
it embodies kind of how like my mind works. And
Yeah.
so I had to go through and teach myself how to be an armor officer because there was no like,
Yeah.
okay, you branch transfer, now we're going to send you this branch training
Yeah.
course, right? And because of the way things were at the time in the Army, I didn't go to the career course right away. I went to the
Yeah.
career course really late. And so I ended up commanding a tank company before I went to the career course, and I commanded a headquarters troop before I went to the career course. But I had learned how to do everything from just watching everything, watching everybody, trying to learn from everything that was going on, but then also like an in-depth study of everything from doctrine to silly armor. Actually, they weren't silly. Armor magazine used to be really good
Yeah.
back then. It's getting better again too. But studying armor magazine, what was said in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s,
Mhm.
what was being written about, and then studying tons and tons of military theory, and that is really what got me. That branch transferring basically got me to the point now where all the writing I do on military thinking and military thought originated with me branch transferring from artillery to armor.
That's interesting. Yeah. I'm married to a retired armor officer, and as you're talking, it's definitely an attitude and a mentality that does not stop when y'all are out of service. He
That's
takes
right.
that tanker dude into every other aspect of life.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. As an armor officer, it's you kind of you sometimes have to bounce between the armor, the tank side, and the
Mhm.
cavalry side. And that was
Yeah.
the other part of it. Like cavalry, like it's all cool because it's like the red and white guidon, right? The big belt buckle, the cool boots, the
Yes.
Stetson,
Oh
you
yeah.
know. And that was really cool, but the mission just I couldn't do it. I'm like, you just want me to sit here and watch stuff and like whisper in the radio? I can't do that, you know? And so I always tried to, when I could pick what I was doing and where I was going, it was always the tank side of armor
Yeah.
branch that I chose because of that. I was like, you know, commanding a tank company. It was phenomenal. Like I commanded a tank company at the National Training Center when the NTC was going back to the force on force, decisive action,
Yeah.
whatever we call it now, LSCO, large scale combat operation. When we were going back to those rotations and having gotten moved away from the Iraq and Afghanistan deployments. And so we did a big train up as part of that. We went out and did those first rotations, and it was terrific because, like, learning how to be an armor officer. So I'd branch transferred a few years before that, but that was really where I got to apply my self education in a real scenario, a real training scenario, right? And I got to go do all these rotations in the National Training Center uh, and see if what I taught myself was correct and what if, you know, what I had learned by observation and talking to senior guys that were armor officers, if what I had learned was correct. And, you know, we went out and did well. And so I was like, okay, I'm doing pretty all right in terms of, you know, the self-education aspect of things. But the cavalry side, like it looks cool, like the idea of it's always cool, but like from a practical standpoint, like it just doesn't work for me. I'm too impatient and too I just can't sit still long enough to do that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No. Sneaking and peeking's not for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is not, yeah.
Yeah. So I know you've been engaged in the defense sector a while. You've seen lots of a couple different wars, conflicts. Can you tell us how warfare has changed kind of since you began your career and kind of what you're seeing now?
Yeah, so when I started, so I first started in the Indiana National Guard back in 1999. And so it was still the BDU Army. It was still Airland Battle, I think. I was still young. I don't remember like what it was we were trained on. I just know what we did, you know. And so we went from that, and I just barely caught that. So then by the time when I got commissioned and went active duty, we had not fully embraced. We were going towards the whole counterinsurgency approach to warfare. And so all that knowledge about being a tanker, for instance, in the Army, like slowly or quickly, depending on how you look at it, dissipated, right, and went away. And so, you know, we went from the one extreme. So like I did my first NTC rotation when I was in the National Guard. I was in a mechanized infantry company, and that was right before 2000. That was August of 2001, right? So September 11th happened the next month. So we were doing those old NTC rotations, and I caught one of those, and then I go from that to the coin counterinsurgency approach to then, all right, now the Army's, I think it's disingenuous to say the Army was jettisoning coin, right? But it has to change towards the reality, right? And so you saw those different changes in how the Army approached war and warfare. And then even now today, things are changing again ish. I think that there's far more hype around some of these changes than what they're actually engendering. And so now you're seeing the dronification of warfare, right? We like to point to them and say they're revolutionary and changing the game. And I mean, sure, they are revolutionary and they are changing how we fight wars, but they're not changing how wars are won or lost. And I think that that's the key part when we look at all of this that folks are overlooking. And so there's been, I guess, you know, that whatever that sine wave of change is, right? But we've seen the whole tail end of airland battle, the GWAT, global war on terrorism, counterinsurgency thing. And it's funny too, like, especially at this point looking back, like you were high-minded, right? Everybody's like, oh, look at how smart this person is. If you embraced counterinsurgency and you talked about how you don't need to shoot people to win the war, right? And the people are the prize. And we go from that to then going back to we've got to focus on gunnery and shooting tanks and being able to do these, high intensity things. And then all those, it's funny too, like now being an academic to see this huge community of people that developed around the idea of studying the Middle East and studying counterinsurgency and insurgency. And it's now like they were all the hype, right? They were all the rage
Yeah.
back for a period of time. And now it's like they're just some academic scraping, trying to get grants and, funding for research projects that nobody cares about right now.
That's true.
And this thing's, spiked in the Middle East over the past 12 months or so. I think they're like, oh, it's my time to shine again. It's been a decade, but I'm back. But they're only back for like a few weeks, and then it's like, nah, we got to talk more about China and Taiwan or Russia and Ukraine.
Right.
And so it's just, it's interesting to see that. And then for me, like personally, I've always tried to just step back and look at war as a whole and warfare as a whole, and not say this is better than that, or this is the one that's the number one be all. Because there's so many factions within like conflict studies, right? And the national defense or national security studies arena. And people want to be like, I'm a specialist in this. And like, that's cool if you want, but like, that's not what I don't specialize. In my assessment, I don't think I'm a specialist in anything. Like my PhD is in international relations, and I focused on proxy wars, and I've written a ton on proxy war. My last journal article that came out a couple of weeks ago is on proxy war. But I also have a book coming out on the future of land warfare in the 21st century, focused all on land warfare, And then I've also got another book coming out next in October, it should be October, on multi-domain operations, right? And so I try and look at it collectively as a whole and not pick one thing. Part of that too is going back to the point on being a tanker at heart and in the mind. I'm just too impatient and too like I got too much energy to just like look at one thing all the time.
Yeah.
My wife says I might have ADHD. I don't know, but I've got to continually be looking at different stuff and studying different stuff and writing about. I just have a lot of interests as it relates to that, and so that's why, like when I look at it, it's actually a rich tapestry, right, to choose from in terms of what you'd like to look at as it relates to the things that are going on within the community, within, what is there to look at? You can look at anything and you can run down the rabbit hole with it, or you can see how it connects with all the other stuff, or you can batch it, but yeah, so there you go.
Well, we all benefit from your varied interest, helping us get the full picture. So what new developments around defense are you most excited about?
I see this is a tricky one. When I was looked at this, when I looked at this beforehand, I'm like, the continuities I think are what excite me the most, because people want to negate the continuities of war and warfare, but and I've said this a bunch to a bunch of people on a bunch of different things. Continuities are continuities. Wait for it, because they're continuities, right? They wouldn't be continuities if they didn't always recur. And we try and it seems like every generation, right? If you go back, Ben Conable has a good book called Ground Combat, and he lays this out really well. If you go back and look at it, he talks about how during Vietnam, Westmoreland, and I forgot the guy's name, but there was a couple of different people within the national security apparatus, to include McNamara and other folks. But they were continually talking then about how precision strike and these new technologies were going to come on board and revolutionize warfare, and warfare in 10 years would not even remotely look like what it looked like then, right? And then we fast forward to like 91, we're saying the same thing. We fast forward to Rumsfeld in 2004 or 2005, he's saying the same thing. And then we get bogged down in counterinsurgency for 20 years. Then we fast forward to 2020, and people point at Nagorno-Karabakh and say, this is it, we've hit the moment, right? And that it strikes me as humorous, because we keep saying the same thing. We keep pointing to the, advances in roughly similar technology, but then like none of it does anything except accelerate us towards the continuities that continually raise their head as much as we don't want them to. And as much as those technologies are supposed to offset those continuities, they actually make them worse. And so, like drones, for instance, right? Like drones have contributed to the war in Ukraine becoming this massive war of attrition. They haven't obviated it. They've not made it any less likely to occur. The fact that there's something flying overhead causes people to go hide in the ground and move slowly and incrementally, and then get, killed when they do lift their head up above ground and try and move forward. Drones have not eliminated that whatsoever. That being attrition, attritional warfare fighting, positional fighting, right? It's made it worse. And so, like, that to me is actually, I think, the thing that's most interesting about everything that's going on in this community, in this field of study. And I think I was at a conference in Paris at the École Militaire. And again, I'll speak French, so pardon me if I butchered that. And I'd given a presentation, right? And during the Q&A, so I was one of the keynote speakers during this thing. And it was really cool because actually, if you can see that photo right there, this is a photo from it.
Yeah.
Peter Roberts, me, Beatrice Heuser, and Dima Adamski. And we were the main people that did the speaking during this thing.
Yeah.
And during the Q&A, one of the people stands up and he's very condescending tone. He says something to the effect of, "It seems like all you've talked about are continuities. How does that matter for the future of war?" Because this conference is on the future of war.
Yeah.
It's a NATO future of war conference.
Yeah.
And I was like, A, did you not listen to anything I just said? B, like, what is it about something being a continuity that you don't understand? Likely meaning it'll continue to be a continuity, right? If you bust open any number of history books on war, right? You see the same basic principles and the same basic methods and outcomes continually happen, right? And so it's just that to me is the thing that like we really need to be talking about, that we keep trying to push aside and be like, well, that's because everybody before us just wasn't as good as us and wasn't as smart as us, right?
Not as
But
smart.
today we're better, right? It's just like the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, right? Why did the war devolve into a war of attrition? Well, it's because neither one of those armies were really actually that good.
Yeah.
No, it's called like that's the way wars tend anyhow. And if you don't find a way to get ahead of that happening, it's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how many drones you have. It's the same thing too. Like Zelensky said a couple months ago, they're the world leader in drone warfare. And their goal, I think it was their goal, is to produce 4.5 million drones per month by the end of 2025, right? And they're on tap to do that or be pretty close. And okay, I understand like how that resonates with the dialogue and discourse going on across the world, across academia, across defense, across all these places. But like that doing that doesn't actually help you accomplish the things you need to accomplish that unlock your political goals for the conflict, right? If retaking that territory that Russia has taken is one of your non-negotiable goals, right? Which it is, and he said that I just like yesterday, I think, when I last looked at was reading some news from that from the conflict. That's still non-negotiable. Like we are not giving up those pieces of territory. Okay, well, drones aren't going to be able to physically go in there and remove the Russian forces that are sitting in there occupying that territory. So what are you doing to address that problem? Right? They're not lowering the draft age or the conscription age, right? And they've got this fixed age group that they're pulling from, and it's older people, right? And older people want to fight less. I was having a conversation with a friend that's an analyst of the conflict, and I was asking him, he had just gotten back. And I said, like, are people afraid to go to jail because like there's a bunch of people going AWOL from the front line, infantrymen going AWOL? And he's like, jail's better than being on the front line. So they really don't care about getting arrested, you know?
Yeah.
And so that I say all that to say that like the continuity piece is the piece that I think is most pertinent, that's also not getting talked about in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, no one wants to talk about that, right? I want to talk
Yeah.
about how the next war is going to be better, quicker, different, bigger, whatever than the last two, three, four that
Yeah, artificial intelligence, right? It's
it's
gonna
gonna
just rapidly,
revolutionize. Yeah.
yeah, speed up decision making to the point that we can just sit and look at our computer screen and outthink the enemy,
Mhm,
you know? Like
mhm. No bullets
it's
needed, no
that's right.
casualties, not on our part, nothing, which
That's
is
right.
kind of like aspirational, I guess, in an idea. I had Ben Conable on here a few weeks ago, and we were talking about that because that's how I got interested in cyber warfare.
Yeah.
Lost family members, IEDs. That's to me, standing back home, it's just like, why are we having people drive over, this like borderline prehistoric explosive made by people, like that just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to me. And it's like, okay, well, it's aspirational, like a whole new level of warfare, maybe one that doesn't go on for 20 years. And then, started digging in and it's like, no, that's not how that works.
And that's the point that I try and make too is I agree with trying to make wars shorter and less deadly
Okay.
and less impactful on the civilian population.
Yeah.
But I don't think you do that by pushing aside the continuities and realities. You have to
Mhm.
pull them in and say, we understand that these are the continuities and realities.
Yeah.
How can we get ahead of it? Right. Because you're not going to necessarily prevent it outside of getting ahead of it. And
Right.
so how can we get ahead of it? And so that's part of why a lot of the book that I have coming up, it's called Maneuvers Dead. And I name
Okay.
it that starkly on purpose to get people's attention so they pick it up and read
Okay.
it, right?
Yeah.
And it lays out these things because part of the problem that particularly the U.S. has is we refuse to accept concepts like attritional warfare and positional warfare as realities, right? And then when we find ourselves inevitably engaged in those concepts, we don't know what to do and how to do it, right? And we just like wag our finger and we're like, oh, that's these guys are stupid, but like they may be stupid, but they've got us bogged down, you
Yeah.
know. And it's the same thing when I got to Iraq. I did my first deployment in November of '05, right? And so if you read any of the books on the Iraq War, that '05 to '06, fall of '05 to '06 period was the worst period of the war.
Mm.
And then, it definitely was. And you talk about driving around getting blown up. We used to always, not we, I was a, brand new lieutenant. I was with all these guys that had been in OIF 1 with
Mhm.
4th ID. And they would talk about back during the first deployment, they'd come out and fight us, and 4 ID was a
Mhm.
mechanized division back then. So it was all tanks and Bradleys. And they talk about, they'd shoot things with the Brads and, now we're driving around and just getting blown up. And then everybody was like, they're not coming out and fighting us. They're
Yeah.
dumb, you know? And it was like, no, actually, they're really smart. Why would they come out and fight us the way that we want them to fight us?
Right.
And because we, the US, and a lot of our friends and partners don't incorporate those ideas into
Mm.
the conversation, and when we do, it's always they're dumb, right? They're not as good as us, so they don't do the things that we do. And we don't have it in our doctrine. So then when we do encounter it, we're like blown away by the fact that, like, oh my God, what do we do? Like the whole
Yeah.
coin thing, that should not have been this massive revolution that rolled around in 2004, 2005, right?
Mhm.
It should have been something that was already in the books that we had
Mhm.
on, like FM 30 operations, although back then I think it was FM 101-5 or 100-5. But anyway, the operations manual, like that should have been a chapter that was already in there, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing too with these ideas like positional and attrition warfare. Like those should be part of doctrine. You can say we would like not to do them, but
Mhm.
if we do have to do them, here's how we'll go about doing it, and here are the things that fall within that, right? Just like we do with everything else that we do embrace. And so that's I think is critical. And Ben, I think is terrific, by the way. He's one of the guys out there that I think's hammering on the facts and the future in a very useful way because there's a lot of stuff out there that's not useful.
Yeah. So, what are your top concerns about national security? What's on your radar? What keeps you up at night? What are you worried about when it comes to national security?
Being unprepared and being unprepared not from a material standpoint, but from a
Hmm.
cognitive standpoint, right? So
Oh.
the threats have been the same basically
Hmm.
my entire adult professional life. The Cold War caused the Soviet Union to fall to the wayside, right? So after that, what was it? Well, that was obviously Russia, then China, Iran, North Korea, and then terrorists or terrorism. And so that really hasn't changed in like the past 25 years,
Yeah.
You can accordion that as you'd like, right? But that's basically it, right? And so if you think big picture, what are the threats? Okay, those are the threats, like threats in terms of national security. And even national security, if we're talking truly national, not global security
Right.
concerns, I would say China, maybe Russia and terrorism, Iran, North Korea, those aren't national security concerns. Those are global security concerns that we inject ourselves into. Rightfully so, I think. I mean, there's a need to, but they're not national security. But and this goes back to A, having been a coach, and then B, having been a lieutenant driving around getting blown up every day and watching everybody around me getting blown up and being unprepared for that reality, right? Like I got there, when I got to Fort Hood, it was, there was like this one simulator we went in for like an hour, and it was almost like an arcade style, like racing car game.
Yeah.
And then it was like, what do you do when you hit an IED? And I was like, what? Maybe we should try not to hit the IED first. You know what I mean? And then like you're in this like race car thing, and it's like, you tell me. I don't know. What do I do? And it was all, and this is the other part of the silliness of a lot of things as it relates to education and training, is like people who don't know just ask open-ended questions because they actually don't know how to tell you, here's a way to think about doing this, right? And so they try and be all Socratic methody with you.
Yes.
But in reality, they're doing that to hide their own ignorance, And that's what it was like during that time period. It was very much like the Socratic questioning. And I'm like, dude, I can see through it. I was an education major. Like my degree, my bachelor and master's are both in secondary ed. Like I can see exactly right through what you're doing. I may be a dumb lieutenant, but I was, a certified, teacher. And anyway, there was that, and then also like the coaching part has always been like, what is it? Like what are we going against? What do we need to prepare for? How do we need to overcome what it is we're going against? What are the things they're going to do that we think we haven't seen yet, right? And so that deconstruction of reality to then reconstruct a winning reality, future state, has always been a way that my mind's worked, because of my, early experience coaching football. And so I've always, when I came into the Army, I still had that mindset, and I still think that way too now. And if you read the things that I write, it's very much written that way. Like, what is the thing? Now let me deconstruct it and then try and reconstruct a counter that goes the opposite direction. And so, again, back to the previous point, these different ways that we will get interacted with adversaries strategically, operationally, and tactically. Like we can't just put aspirational ideas out there, because when we get out there, like Second Lieutenant Fox in Iraq in 2005, driving around getting blown up, you're not going to know what to do, outside of basic survival instinct stuff like, oh man, I just got blown up. What do I do? Don't get blown up again. That's the first thing. You know what I mean? And then try and make sense of the situation, And so that kind of thing is really what bothers me. And I think that we're marching down the path of complete ignorance as it relates to that, because we're putting our hands over our ears and covering our eyes and saying, and drinking the drone Kool-Aid and the AI Kool-Aid and the long-range precision strike Kool-Aid. It's funny how people say that phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid, and they don't realize it's a Jim Jones reference,
Yeah, I
Which,
thought
by the
about
way,
that.
he went to Butler. He was a Butler University person.
I
Yeah,
take it
I
he's
didn't-
not on the website.
No.
They are not
When I was a freshman, me and my roommate and I were middle school and high school buddies and still friends. And we like someday had figured that out, and we set up one day like a Jim Jones thing, and it was a big Gatorade cooler full of Kool-Aid.
Oh,
We got in
gosh.
trouble. They like came out and made us shut it down. But we're like, it's Jim Jones, one of Butler's little known alum. But anyhow, the But I think that that's a dangerous path that we're on.
Mhm.
And again, and it's no fault of especially folks coming up and coming along
Yeah,
because they trust what they're being told, because they
right.
trust the institution. Um, but the institution, I think, is leading them astray
Mhm.
um, in that regard. And I think that that's dangerous because if we do find ourselves having to fight China over Taiwan, if we do find ourselves having to fight Russia over fill in the blank
Mhm.
somewhere in Eastern Europe, all the stuff we're telling ourselves about how we're going to fight is not going to be true. There may be small portions of it that are, but by and large, it's going to be that, and our force structure will also not be correctly built. You know,
Yeah.
we've in the past 2 years, the Army's gotten rid of a bunch of segments of its land force to create
Mhm.
cap space, right? Because it's all zero sum to
Mhm.
create money essentially and force structure to build these drones, to field the drones, and then to get all the stuff that goes into these multi-domain task forces, for
Mhm.
instance. Like those are great, but they can't go eliminate, Russians hiding in buildings or Russians
Mhm.
hiding in bunkers and trenches. You have to have people on the ground to do that. You may be able to develop robots to do that in the future, but we
Mhm.
don't have those right now, you know? And so
Mhm.
until we do, we don't need to eliminate the force structure that allows us to do those, even though, and there's a huge hype narrative game that goes with long range precision strike, you know? You see people all day long beating the drum about Ukraine. If
Mhm.
we just given them more attackums
Yeah.
early on, this wouldn't have happened. Okay, well, you may be right, but that's not the reality and we're now. Now
Yeah.
they need people on the ground, infantrymen, armor, engineers to go in and clear all those Russians out. And that's
Mhm.
gonna, if you think about force ratios, right? It's if you buy the theory, it takes, three offensive people for every one person in the defense,
Mhm.
not in an urban area. It's even
Mhm.
greater in urban areas, right? It's going to take significant numbers of people to counter that problem. And so as we continue to shrink the land size of the army, which is ironic since the army is an army and it exists to fight and win wars on land. But as we continue to constrict there to grow precision strike and to grow drones, we're actually exacerbating the problem of people hiding in terrain, right? Because again, if you get struck from above, if you get hit from missiles that are coming in, if you get hit from drones, go back to survival instinct, you're going to go into that building, you're going to go
Mhm.
underground, you're going to do something like that. You're not just going to stand there and say, hey, here I am, kill me, you
Mhm.
know? And that in turn is going to require a reciprocal effort, which is that land force to go in and address those problems of people hiding. And so we're actually fueling the problem that's not yet come to us, where we're going to be like, oh my gosh, now we have this huge problem where these, the threat is hiding in all
Mhm.
this difficult terrain and we can't get in and get them out. What
Mhm.
are we going to do? I don't know, and that to me is like a serious error that's not yet. I think we're hedging our bets in many cases. We're like, well, we
Mhm.
probably won't actually come to that situation. But
Mhm.
again, if you look at like the beginning days of Operation Enduring Freedom, when we went into Afghanistan, what let bin Laden get away? It wasn't the
Yeah.
lack of aircraft and strike capability. It was the lack of people on the ground to be able to seal the border, right?
Mhm.
To physically be there,
Mhm.
observe, and then shoot if they needed to,
Mhm.
if the threat, and to get into the crevices of the mountains that were up there that people could hide into. And so that's what I think folks need to not forget is that like technology is terrific. I'm not a Luddite, if you will,
Yeah.
at all. But you have to have people on the ground that are trained and educated to do the types of fighting that you're going to have to do.
Mhm.
And I just don't think we're not moving in that direction. We're moving in the
Mhm.
opposite direction. We're changing force structure to actually exacerbate that future problem, not eliminate that future problem.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that's I think that's essentially it. That was a long answer to a short question.
Well, sometimes I think people, they just so desperately want it to be, a technology problem and a tech solution because
Yep.
you could hit a button, right? You could upload a program, have it run. Whereas what you're talking about, having humans who are trained and capable not only
Yep.
to do something, but also withstand it for however long that will last, or whatever the needs that present themselves are. That's hard. That's much harder than just, here's a program, here's some high-tech equipment, this is cool, this looks, robot sexy, whatever. Is like, this is easy, when the reality of life is, I don't know if we have really evolved to the point that all our problems are tech problems that can be solved by tech. People have not been actually automated to that degree, which you provided a great example with Operation Enduring Freedom and Bin Laden.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the other part of it is we talk a lot about, folks want to sound smart. Again, trying to sound smart. People want to quote Clausewitz and talk about, the nature of war. War's a human endeavor, and it's fraught with fog, friction, and chance, and it's a combative contest of wills. We say those words, but we don't actually think about how they apply to the adversary, right? And so, like, it's a contest of wills. We say that, but then we completely negate the will of the adversary. And part of will is, you're attacking me. I don't want to die. What am I going to do? I'm going to do everything in my power to find a way to negate your superior strength, right? And by virtue of that, your technology, and so and then we get surprised. We're like, oh, they were hiding in mountains and we couldn't find them, huh? Or we dropped this bomb and they were hiding in a cave, but the cave was further back than we thought, and it didn't actually have any effect on the cave. Oh man, and we're shocked. I'm like, yeah, if we had, like, the people in charge asked, I forget who it was, but somebody had asked for like a battalion of Rangers to help seal the pass in Afghanistan in those early days. And it was denied by Franks, and I think he may have pushed it up and went ahead and asked the Pentagon. It was, Rumsfeld said no, and it came back down no. And then, boom, they get through the pass that we said we need people up there to protect. And that's just one example of this. There's a million that you could come up with, right? And so that's, I think, we talk a lot. Again, we talk great game. We throw out the words we're supposed to throw out. We throw out the theorists we're supposed to throw out, but we don't actually apply that to reality, right? Like whoever the opponent may be, they also have will and want to survive, and they won't come fight you out in the open the way you want to fight, right? And they're going to try and survive. First rule of war is survive, right? Second rule of war is, if you're surviving, then go ahead and try and win, whatever winning means to you. And that's the other thing too, we forget. Like, we always think our definition of what victory should be for them is the definition of victory, and then we're confounded when we're like, why are they still here? We thought this would be over by now. Like, we've met, according to our estimate, they should be done, and it's like, well, you didn't factor them in appropriately. So anyway, you get me fired up. These are things I get like super excited about.
Well, when you finish your other two books, I think you need to do one, Reality-Based Strategy by Dr. Fox. All the things you don't want to hear, but need to.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what my book, Conflict Realism, is about. So a little bit.
A little bit. So how has technology reshaped the way that we approach security and defense? And I know you've touched on some of that, but
yeah, no, and I think you did a good job teasing it out too. I think we think that it's going to be, or it is almost a like, all right, just hit the button, run the algorithm, get the answers, Yeah. I really fear, also as an educator, right? So as a professor, I also fear this whole move towards embracing AI is going to make us dumber in the long run, and we're not going to possess the tools to do the mental work, to come up with the answers and to find the connections and the interconnections and the causality of things. And then we're going to sit there and it's almost like a devolution, right? A de-evolution of mental acuity that's potentially going to happen if we don't get out of our own way. And so I think that's one of the big things that's hindering things in terms of technology. And just, again, thinking that I worked at Futures Command before I retired, and so much of that you would deal with, it was a weird world, because you would deal with all these scientists who would tell you that this thing can do that thing, right? Like, I had this guy that I worked with quite often, and he just could not get over the fact that drones were not the answer to the problems of future war. And he's like, but they can do, and I would try and have this conversation with him about terrain. And I'm like, again, and I don't mean any ill will, and it's cool because I'm like, having been on both sides now, being an academic, I can make fun of academics, and having been a soldier, I can make fun of soldiers. But this guy had never been a soldier. You know what I mean? He has no appreciation for what happens in a fight on the battlefield, right? And how terrain, like micro terrain, can significantly impact basic stuff, you know? And so I would try and have this conversation with him, and he just had no conceptual appreciation for any of this. And it was like he saw the battlefield as this like flat, pool table where a drone could eliminate all the problems. And I'm like, it's not like that, man. It's not like that at all. And he's like, well, what about in Iraq? It's flat and wide open. I'm like, kind of, like generically speaking, yes, it is, but no, it's not. And I was showing my wife, I was looking at a picture the other day, we were looking at a picture book, and I stumbled across a picture from Iraq, and it was on the Tigris River, and it's this massive jungle right on the river. And I was like, this is the part of Iraq that people don't ever think about when they think about Iraq, right? We had to go in there and like clear this jungle of, there was a car bomb making facility in there, and we had to go clear all this, like we had to clear all the bad guys out and then clear the facility and get EOD out there to take care of all the munitions. But I was like this, people don't see that when they say Iraq's just a flat open desert, And I didn't know that before I went there. And then I didn't even know that because we got pulled up there for a special mission for about a week and a half. And when I got up there, I was like, what the hell is this? Because we've been down and it had been, in a relatively flat open area. But even that, there's like terrain, these canal roads. If you go back and look, a lot of trucks were getting flipped with pressure, not explosive IEDs. They did explode, but the goal wasn't shrapnel type IEDs, but it was overpressure. And the idea was to flip the trucks into these canals, right? And so you would see, if you go back and look at this time period, that 2005-ish, a little further out, that probably 2007, we lost a group of guys on my second deployment, 2008 or 2009, on Christmas Day, 2008, to this very situation. A overpressure IED flipped a truck into one of these canals because it was an elevated canal road that ran along a canal. And they would try and knock the truck into the canal so that everybody inside the truck would drown, and that's what happened. And so if you go back and look at the record of how people died, some of these people died from drowning, and that's why. And so appreciating things like that, things like technology can't solve many of the problems of terrain, for instance, is one of the things that I think is getting in the way of technology and how technology can help. And having people, really smart people, really highly qualified people, really highly qualified tech people work on this with us is helpful for sure. But there needs to be, I think, a better buffer between what they're advocating and selling and how it's being materialized, both in terms of its applicability, but then also where it fits in formations and how it can be best used in formations and on the battlefield. So I think that's really the big thing with that.
No, that's very insightful. So I know you've covered a lot of topics today. I appreciate you doing some deep dives into some sticky topics that a lot of folks just like to gloss over. So do you have any final words of, advice or resources, for the audience that you would like to leave them with or share?
A couple things. So I think in terms of advice, I think for anybody that's still serving, you got to balance your priorities and make sure that, I would remember your responsibilities, right? Like children, they didn't ask to be brought into the world. If you brought them into the world, it's your responsibility to take care of them. Part of taking care of them is being there physically for them, and being there mentally when you are there physically. And that was part of the problem I also had early on for myself, was I would be home physically, but I wouldn't be home mentally, And so just like those things have to be intertwined. And then at the same time, if you're somebody's boss, if you're a leader, understanding that and setting the example yourself by pushing people hard at work, right? To get the job done and meet the mission, but then also allowing them to be human beings. Because I think that that's probably, I don't know what the research, if there is real research on this, but like a real reason I think a lot of people get dissatisfied and leave or retire as soon as they can, right? Is because they're like, you know what? Like, I want to be a person and I'm not able to be a person while doing this. And I've done the requirement that I had to do, and now it's time to do something else. Whereas you could probably keep a lot of people around if you found ways to let them be people first, or not, first necessarily, but people alongside wearing whichever uniform it is they wear. So that's a big thing. And then I think for everybody, it's important to not just be an institutionally minded individual as it relates to where they fit within the institution. And I use that as a very generic term, obviously. But like, go out and try and make sense of the world. Go out, and if they tell you this is what you do, go look at what it is, study it, learn it, understand it. But then, like, what is that based on? Right. And then start just working your way backwards from there so that you have a very broad understanding of the ideas and concepts that you're being told or what it is you're supposed to be doing. And then if you disagree or you have additional thoughts, go out and talk about it, go out and write about it. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, pushing back against the institution and saying, I think you're wrong, isn't disloyal and it isn't bad. It's actually something that, like, if the institution's not self-conscious, if you will, they should embrace and be like, oh, thank you very much for that, right? But also know that that's not necessarily reality. And a lot of times the institution and leaders within the institution that are very institutionally minded will see that as a, well, so-and-so is not a team player, and that can negatively affect you. All right. So I would just keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, like, what's more important to you? For me, trying to make the institution better by saying, hey, we're missing the boat on this and we need to do this instead, was more important than being institutionally minded and worrying about not offending my boss or bosses. You know what I mean? And that's could have a whole conversation on that too. That's a fun one. But so that's the thing. The other part of that is know that there will inevitably, it's a hard one to say today. Inevitably, I'm just going to leave it at that, will be blowback, right? And so don't go in naive thinking I'm going to write this paper that says that this thing's silly and we need to do that thing instead, and that you're not going to get, called in front of the boss. Like, I published a paper with a couple colleagues in 2018, and it was called "The Army's Wrong in the Future of War." It came out when I got to work. I was a S3. I was the operations officer in a battalion. My brigade commander summoned me to chastise me for saying that, and like, I did okay in that place, but I didn't do as good as I had hoped. And a lot of it was carryover from stuff like that, And like, oh, Amos isn't a team player. I'm like, bro, I'm a total team player. That's why I'm saying we're wrong, So that's it. There's costs and benefits to everything, and it depends on what you value more in terms of how you live your life and what you think about the world and your values. So,
well, that's some good advice. I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experiences, your insights. I've read your writing for years, and just always kind of impressed me as someone who, was willing to ask the questions that everyone else, they may have been thinking them, but they weren't going to say it. And so I really appreciate your boldness in terms of, okay, let's look at this. Let's make sure this is the accurate approach. Because that's a rare trait in today's world.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I will say none of that did not come without a cost, and that's part of the reason I'm retired instead of continuing on. But I tell my wife, and my wife tells me, she actually said it last night. We have this daddy pillow from my last deployment, right? And it's me and my uniform, and And my wife said, man, I tell you what, I don't miss that at all. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so that to me, I was like, man, it makes it totally worth it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
being on this side of things and hearing my wife say that, I'm like, yeah, we made the right decision. And that's the other thing too. Like you got to make the right decision for you and your family and the
Yeah.
situation. And sometimes that is saying, all right, well, it's time to, you know, continue to work on this subject, but from a different angle, you know?
Yeah.
And so like that's what I'm doing now. Like as a academic, I still address the same stuff. I still write
Yeah.
about most of the same stuff and talk about the same stuff. I was in Rome at NATO Defense College in July. I'm going to Ottawa next month to
Mhm.
talk to the Canadian military, do all these different things. So I'm still fully invested in it. You know, it's just now I'm doing it in a polo or a suit instead of a uniform.
No mandatory PT.
Right. That's right. I tell you too, the last part, I've gotten in so much better shape since I left the army. It's so funny, you
That
know?
is funny.
Yeah. I just yeah, the get up first thing in the morning workout. That's not how like again, that doesn't I don't like being boxed in. It boxes me in. You know what I mean? I like to work out when I feel it. And I work out 6 days a week, you know. But
Yeah.
I'm in like far better shape now than I've been since I was probably 26, you know.
Wow.
So like 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
You got to do it your way. Blaze that trail.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, thanks so much for coming on Tipping Spears. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, it's been terrific. Thank you.
Yeah. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears. We hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.